The second I stepped into that stuffy little courtroom in Riverside County, I could almost taste the smugness rolling off Karen Peaton like cheap perfume in a crowded elevator. There she was, parked at the plaintiff's table, her French-tipped nails drumming on a stack of documents so thick it could have doubled as a doorstop. Her lips were pinched in that signature Karen smirk that said, "I'm about to make someone cry, and I've already picked out my victory." Earrings. She'd hauled me into court because she was dead certain she could bully me into obeying every sacred rule of the Maple Grove HOA. There was just one teensy problem with her evil genius scheme. I didn't even live in her HOA, but a minor detail like reality had never slowed Karen down before. In roughly 3 minutes, however, I was going to watch her entire reign of terror collapse because of one single sheet of paper. Let me rewind a few months, so you understand how I ended up in a stare down with the most infamous HOA president in California. I had just finished building my dream cabin on 5 gorgeous acres I'd bought outright with cold, hard cash. The land sat right on the edge of the ultra-fancy Maple Grove subdivision, technically outside their borders, but close enough that I could wave at their identical beige rooftops from my back deck. I was obsessed with everything about the place. The huge wraparound porch where I drank coffee and watched the sun drop behind the mountains. The native plants I'd spent months arranging, and especially the rich forest green siding that made the cabin look like it had grown straight out of the pines. It was my personal paradise, paid for with 15 years of grinding as a software engineer. That's when Karen Peaton first materialized. One Tuesday morning, she marched right up to my property line, clutching a clipboard and wearing a frown sour enough to wilt flowers. She announced herself as president of the Maple Grove HOA and immediately unloaded about how my cabin was direct quote an eyesore that violated their precious community aesthetic. With the most condescending smile I've ever seen, she informed me that my trees were too tall and gave the neighborhood an unkempt vibe. She said my forest green paint wasn't on their approved color palette. She even had the nerve to demand I rip out my perfectly good gravel driveway and repave it with whatever overpriced contractor her board had on speed dial. I let her rant for about 5 minutes, then calmly explained that I wasn't in her HOA and therefore not subject to a single one of her rules. The expression on her face was pure gold, mouth flapping open and shut like a largemouth bass yanked out of the lake. Then her eyes narrowed into little slits, and she cooed, in the fakest sweet voice imaginable, that she'd this. I should have known right then she was declaring war. Over the next few weeks, Karen turned her crusade against my cabin into a full-time hobby. It started with stern letters on official HOA letterhead, each one more threatening than the last. When I tossed those straight into the recycling, she recruited her board minions Bob Harrison and Janet Wu, convincing them my little green cabin was single-handedly tanking their property values, even though prices in the area had jumped 8% since I moved in. She spent weekends creeping around my fence line, taking photos from every angle, circling violations in psychotic lady style with a red Sharpie. She put together a full PowerPoint for the next board meeting, yes, with sliding transitions and dramatic music like she was presenting the case for nuclear disarmament. She even shelled out for a surveyor, praying for some microscopic overlap that would put me under her thumb. Her supposed gotcha moment came when she unearthed a dusty 1997 planning memo that mentioned a possible future expansion zone for Maple Grove. She clung to that vague paragraph like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls, insisting my land was secretly part of her empire and therefore bound by every covenant they'd ever dreamed up. Never mind that I'd never signed a thing, never received their 400-page rule Bible, and definitely never paid a penny in dues. In Karen's mind, simple geography was enough to make me her subject. When threats and passive-aggressive newsletters didn't work, Karen did the only logical next thing she could think of, sarcasm intended. She sued me. The summons showed up on a Thursday, delivered by a process server who looked like he wanted to apologize on her behalf. The complaint was 23 pages of lawyer speak, but the demands were crystal clear. Repaint the house beige or taupe, chop down every tree over 12 feet, pave the driveway with their chosen asphalt, install their approved landscaping, and my personal favorite cough up 5 years of retroactive HOA dues for a neighborhood I'd never joined. Grand total they wanted, 32, 1 for 7, 62. I'd have freaked out. I could have hired some high-dollar attorney. Instead, I made one phone call to the county recorder's office and asked for a single, very specific document. Then I sat back and waited for trial day, which brings us full circle to that sweaty little courtroom where Karen was practically glowing with overconfidence. She'd rolled in a full 45 minutes early, dragging 2 enormous suitcases stuffed with evidence, color-coded binders, and poster boards with blown-up photos, like she was presenting a murder case on Dateline. She was even wearing what I can only assume was her lucky lawsuit suit, a charcoal gray power outfit so severe it looked like it had been designed by a Bond villain. Judge Patricia Steinberg called the case, and Karen shot out of her chair like she'd been spring-loaded. She launched into the monologue she'd clearly rehearsed in her bathroom mirror at least 100 times, voice quivering with righteous fury about community standards, sacred covenants, and existential threat my little green cabin posed to Western civilization. For 2 minutes and 47 seconds, she performed, slapping photos on the table, waving the HOA bylaws like the 10 Commandments, and painting me as some kind of backwoods rebel hell bent on destroying decades of beige conformity. When she finally sat down, flushed and triumphant, Judge Steinberg turned to me with the calm, "Your response, sir." I reached into my cheap manila folder, pulled out one single sheet of paper, and slid it across the bench. The judge took it, slipped on her reading glasses, and started reading. It was glorious in its simplicity. A certified 1994 subdivision map from the Riverside County Recorder's office showing my 5 acres had been split off from the original parcel 3 years before the Maple Grove HOA even existed. The legal description was crystal clear, and the final line was the knockout punch. This parcel is not now, and shall never be subject to any covenants, conditions, or restrictions of any homeowners association. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's manicured nails froze mid-tap. The smug grin slid off her face like cheap lipstick in a rainstorm. Judge Steinberg looked up over the rims of her glasses and fixed Karen with a stare cold enough to flash freeze coffee. In a voice that somehow stayed polite while dripping contempt, she said the lawsuit wasn't just baseless. It was borderline harassment. She told Karen that weaponizing the court system to bully people who aren't even in your HOA was a grotesque waste of judicial resources, and that any further attempts to exert authority beyond the recorded boundaries would have serious consequences. Then came the hammer. The judge ruled entirely in my favor, ordered the Maple Grove HOA to pay every penny of my legal expenses for 800, and issued a formal cease and desist, barring Karen or anyone acting on behalf of the HOA from ever contacting me or coming near my property again. For good measure, she declared, the ruling would be entered as public record and serve as a binding precedent against any future overreach by Maple Grove. Finally, she looked straight at Karen and suggested, in the politest possible terms, that the board might want to reconsider whether someone who so enthusiastically abused power was fit to lead them. Karen stood there, turning colors. I didn't know human skin could achieve. Her hands shook as she tried to stuff her useless binders back into the suitcases. She started mumbling about an appeal, but Judge Steinberg shut her down with one sharp crack of the gavel. Case dismissed with prejudice. Translation: don't ever bring this nonsense back. The fallout hit Karen like a freight train. Word of the courtroom bloodbath spread through Maple Grove faster than gossip at a potluck. That same night, the board held an emergency meeting. By unanimous vote 12-0, with Karen abstaining because she was too busy crying, they stripped her of the presidency. The $4,800 judgment came out of the HOA's budget, which meant a special assessment. Every homeowner got hit with an extra $40 bill, because Karen decided to wage holy war on someone who didn't even live there. People were livid. The real death blow came the following Monday. Karen, as it turns out, was a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker. News of her trying to illegally enforce non-existent HOA rules on a non-member traveled straight to her managing broker, Attempting to strong-arm someone into covenants they never agreed to is the kind of thing that gets you ethics complaints and license reviews. She was summoned to the office first thing in the morning. By lunch, she was on indefinite suspension pending a full investigation by the California Department of Real Estate. Possible penalties? Up to $25,000 in fines and revocation of the license she'd spent 15 years building. That evening, as I drove past the Maple Grove clubhouse, I spotted her car in the otherwise empty lot. Through the big plate glass window, I could see her sitting alone at the long conference table where she used to rule from, surrounded by cardboard boxes stuffed with her presidential files, shoulders shaking as she sobbed, for one brief second, and I almost felt bad for her, almost.